Look, on Leadership Now, I promised never to do commercials, but here we are. Why? Well, I have a new book in the works. It's coming out spring 2026, and I wanted to give you an advance heads up about it. The title, The Future of Work is Gray, and it's kind of a big deal to me because the book dives into the age crisis that's reshaping work as we know it. It's something that I call age debt, but spoiler alert, it does turn into some solution. There's some hope, there's some positive, and that's called the experience dividend. So if your workplace still thinks that age is a liability, well, it's time to retire that mindset. In fact, we might want to retire the word retire. So yeah, I don't do ads. This is a special occasion, and for it, I am willing to go gray. And maybe Grey Goose will sponsor me, not sure. Anyway, spring 2026, the future of work is gray. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Leadership Now with me, Dan Pontefract, in the house today. Jeanette Leardi. Jeanette, a little bio, we're going to get into it, and I'm really excited to talk a bit about you being a social gerontologist and, of course, your book, Aging Sideways. So, Jeanette, you're a community educator, social gerontologist, obviously, writer, public speaker, and aging wellness leader who has a passion for empowering older adults and helping them identify and share their wisdom with others. Her decades of experiences as a caregiver to her parents inspired her, quote, encore career goals, I love that, of changing perceptions about the aging process and promoting awareness of elders' inherent dignity, wisdom, and unique value as mentors and catalysts for social change. Leardi's efforts include giving engaging in-person and virtual presentations, workshops, and classes to people to all ages, obviously, and writing articles for Next Avenue, Third Act Magazine, and other publications, including appearing on national broadcasts. Jeanette's editorial experiences include positions at Newsweek, Life, People, Condé Nast Traveler, and Sesame Street magazines, my favorite. She has an MA with honors in English from Rutgers University and a gerontology graduate certificate from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. And of course, her latest book, which we'll get into today, is titled Aging Sideways, Changing Our Perspectives on Getting Older. So let's start there, Jeanette. Welcome to the show. The title, Aging Sideways, very intriguing. And I guess there's a subliminal or hidden message in there. It implies a kind of a non-linear approach to aging. So let's start there. Aging sideways, what does it mean? And how is this concept in your mind helping to reshape the societal perceptions or misperceptions of aging?
Well, first of all, thank you, Dan, for inviting me. This is, I'm thrilled. I'm always thrilled to talk about aging because we get aging so wrong in our culture. Aging Sideways, actually, the idea for the title came from a book by Betty Edwards, an art teacher. Decades ago, she wrote a book called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. And she had an exercise she gave her students called upside down drawing. So if you take, let's say, a photograph of a chair and you ask people to copy that photograph, they'll do their best, they'll create the arms, the legs, the seat, the whatever. But she found that if you turn the picture upside down and you have them draw the upside down picture, all they seem to see are the lines and the spaces between the lines. It kind of puts that editorial preconceived notion of chairness kind of to sleep. And you're just looking at what you see right in front of you. And what she found is when the students turned their drawings right side up, those drawings were far more accurate than the drawing that they first made just looking at the chair right side up. So my idea is not to necessarily turn people's brains entirely upside down about aging, but let's just kind of cock our heads to the side a little bit and say, am I really looking at aging the right way? We tend to have blinders on. We have this notion of aging as nothing but deterioration and decline. And that is just so limiting to what aging is, because aging is growth as well as what we seem to feel like we lose, we also gain other things. And my concept is to help us to see aging for what it is, what it actually is. So that's why I call the book Aging Sideways. We need to kind of cock our heads to the side a little bit and say, I don't know if I'm really seeing this in the right way. And I give examples and strategies for doing that in the book.
Indeed, you do. We're going to get into kind of those four principles. I really like them. But I want to first start with sort of the book also advocates, obviously, the sort of redefinition, if you will, of what it means to grow older. And in society, however, there is sort of this subliminal, hidden, sometimes overt um, ageism that, I'm having an elder moment, or, gray hair is not so great, or, oh, they're wrinkly. And there's an obvious physical dimension to aging, but you're suggesting that actually this is normal and
Yeah.
that this is a healthy part of everyone's life. So what's the empowering narrative around aging we're getting wrong, and what are we trying to advocate for, and what are you trying to advocate for differently?
What we're getting wrong is that limited view of age, of all of this stuff, that gray hair is a bad thing, that wrinkles are bad, that we need to fight aging, fight looking older. We need to stay as young as possible. So we invest billions of dollars into the anti-aging industry, Botox and, creams. Actually, there's recently a trend, a very sad trend of girls in their preteens now going to these beauty stores looking for creams to keep them from aging. It's like, what are we doing? We're supposed to be aging. I mean, if you're alive, you're aging. That's the fact, and we're all alive, so we're all aging, and we all age from birth. So that's what my understanding and what I want to tell other people about aging is that this is supposed to happen. We shouldn't be fighting it. We should be looking more carefully as what are the kinds of things we gain as we get older. Our brains actually change. Our brains are plastic. And so as we get older, we may lose some speed of processing, let's say. It may take us a little longer to come up with a fact or to process something that's new. We may have some problems with short-term memory, this elder moment thing that you say. Well, those moments can start more often, begin to start when we're in our late 20s. So everyone has moments. It's just that they seem to happen more often the older we get. So let's stop talking about an elder moment. We all have moments. But so we lose some things as we get older, but our brains actually change to give us some other skills that we couldn't possibly get when we were younger. For example, we have two hemispheres. Our brain has two hemispheres, a left and a right, but actually they don't touch except for a bridge of tissue in the middle called the corpus callosum. We're born with that little fragile bridge of tissue, but as we get older, it gets thicker and thicker until it matures when we're in our 50s. It doesn't fully mature until we're in our 50s. And what that means is that we're able to use both hemispheres of our brain simultaneously better than we did when we were younger. I mean, we always use all parts of our brain. This myth that we only use 10% of our brain. No, we use all of our brain all the time. It's just that we have the capacity to grow our brains and grow the connections between our brain cells as we get older. So what does it mean that we use our both hemispheres simultaneously better? We problem solve differently as we get older than when we were younger. When we're young, we tend to want to, when we do a task, our brain tends to want to favor one side or the other in doing that task. Not to say that it doesn't engage the other side, it does, but it's sort of like wants one side or the other to take charge. So we can come up with ideas very quickly. Oh, let's do this, let's do that. As we get older and we start to kind of use both sides equally, what we get better at is problem solving,
Hmm.
coming from multi perspectives. So we get to see not so much the black and white of life, but the gray of life, the what ifs. Oh, yeah, let's do this idea, but we may have a problem when we come to this situation. Let's keep on the alert for it. That's what the older brain does better, quality control. And that's just one example of how our brains change. And nobody really seems to know about this. And that's what I'd love to talk about.
I love that. And it goes without saying, of course, the front and the back, right? When we're younger, it's basically all amygdala. And when we get wiser, we have far greater executive function, thus prefrontal cortex capability. So when you see a front and a back and a left and a right, man, like as we get older, we're awesome, right? We're kind of wisdom masters. We are Gandalf and Harriet Tubman all in one. It's amazing. Okay,
Well,
so
Gene Cohen, who is a very famous gerontologist and doctor, he said it's like we go from two-wheel drive to all-wheel drive. So look at it
That's
that
really
way.
good. I like that. That's very, very good. Okay, so in the book, I wanted to actually, before getting into the four strategies, which I do want to talk about, but you do turn the lens on yourself a little bit, and you talk a bit about your parents, and sort of the career shift effectively that you've had from what you were to where you are. So from a very storied career to social gerontologist. So actually, I wanted to go there, if you don't mind, and sort of help us and the listeners and the viewers understand your journey and sort of that pivot that you've made and where you're at now.
Okay, sure. Well, I've always been a writer. Even as a child, I loved to write, and I actually started out my career writing for children, writing educational materials for children, which I still do. So I have both ends of the aging spectrum that I deal with. Um, and when I was in my I'm 72 now, and by the way, I think we should be declaring our age, not just admitting it. We should be proud of whatever age we are, that we got this far, and that we have a ways to go. So when I was in my late 40s, I became the full-time caregiver to both my parents, both simultaneously and sequentially. And I was just stunned and appalled by how hard it was to get them what we call person-centered care,
Hmm.
care that is geared to the individual, not care that is convenient to the institution, but what they needed and wanted as individuals. And so after they both passed away, I went back to graduate school. Now I got a graduate degree in, as you said, in English in my late 20s. But at the age of 57, I went back to graduate school and I studied gerontology. And because I wanted to figure out why we get aging so wrong and how we can get aging right. And so then from then on, I've been devoting more and more of my time to talking about aging. And since we're all aging, the concept of aging relates to every one of us, no matter our age. Do you know that children as young as 3 years old can start to absorb ageist messages and start to absorb these bad feelings about getting older as young as 3 years old?
Wow.
So that's why I'm such an advocate for intergenerational exchange and intergenerational relationships. We're too siloed in our society. Kids go to school and they spend time with other kids their age, and then they go home and maybe they see their older grandparents occasionally, but they don't get to see more older people on a regular basis. And a lot of times older people are isolated or they live far away from their grandkids if they have grandkids. We need to be getting our generations back together, which is actually the way it has always been in history. It started in the Industrial Revolution, that we started to separate when younger people left the farms and went into the cities to get work in the factories. That's when we started to kind of veer off the traditional historical way of being together. Because millennia ago, think about it, you're in a village in the medieval times, or even in prehistoric times, people lived of all ages lived in the same cave together, the same
Right.
hut together. That's what we need to start getting back to. So my journey has been to help people understand aging, because we basically get it wrong, and we get it wrong because there are ways of making money that want us to keep getting it wrong, such as the anti-aging industry. They want to keep people want to keep us afraid of getting older, and we need to just get rid of that fear and say, look, this is what's going to happen and what should happen, and we can improve the way in which it happens for us.
Well, you have these in the book, then these kind of four, you call them sideways skills, that sort of become really pillars to how one and society arguably need to be thinking, in this idea of aging sideways. So, sideways skill number one, quote, sidestepping a deeply embedded obstacle you're approaching rather than retreating from it or futilely trying to remove it. So, unpack that one for us and how that is a skill.
Okay, well, when we get to this barrier, let's use the example of considering ourselves old. Now, I call myself an old person. I'm 72, and I'm okay with the word old. How
Mhm.
many of us would really be okay calling ourselves old if we get to the age where we think we are an old person? So it's like this boulder in our path. Oh no, I'm going to sidestep it, or I'm going to go back. I'm not continuing on this road if meeting up with this boulder called old is going to hit me. No, I'm going to go back. Well, instead of doing that, sidestep it and say, all right, there's a boulder there, and I'm going to just get past it because I'm going to embrace the fact that I'm old. I can easily, that's not going to block me from continuing to engage in the world, continuing to share my skills, to share my knowledge. So that's what I mean about sidestepping and kind of instead of struggling so hard against something that is really futile. I mean, the alternative to not getting old is what? Is dying. So really, why don't we just figure out a way to deal with the oldness in our life? Now, for some people, calling themselves old is going to be a hard thing to do, but maybe call yourself an older adult. I'm an
Mm.
older adult, okay? And uh, you know, since when does being old mean that uh, you don't deserve that kind of respect? The word senior is a real problem in our culture. People don't like the word senior citizens, senior centers, senior. Well, when you're in high school, isn't being a senior the coolest thing to be? It's cooler
Yeah,
than being a
yeah,
junior or a
yeah.
freshman or sophomore. Same thing in college. If you're the senior vice president of a company, you're above the other vice presidents. Well, why don't we consider ourselves senior citizens of life or senior vice presidents of life? Maybe being a senior is a cool thing to be. So that's what I mean by sidestepping and not struggling against something that's inevitable. Let's give that up. It's a waste of energy.
Well, it segues nicely that whole notion about senior, and I totally agree with that. To sideways skill number two, where you say redefining a term or concept in a way that makes its meaning more accurate or more relevant to you.
Right, right. Okay, so I just gave you the example with senior. Here's another example. Have you heard the phrase silver tsunami or gray
Yeah,
tsunami?
yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
yeah, right. Well, I'm a baby boomer, and we get pinned with this term because there's so many of us. By the way, there are now more millennials than there are boomers. Millennials are the biggest generation,
Hmm.
if we're going to talk generations. But silver tsunami, there's so many of us that we're using up um, all of the resources of our country. Speaking as an American, we're wiping out Social Security. We're going to wipe out Medicare and all of that. Um, I think that first of all, that's not true. There are ways of solving those economic problems that nobody's going to wipe them out. But secondly, um, what we have so much to give, but we're blocked from giving it. We as older adults don't have as many opportunities as we had when we were younger because of this ageism, because of this age bias, thinking that older people are not really relevant or useful anymore. I consider ourselves a silver reservoir. We're not a silver
Ooh,
tsunami. We're a silver reservoir. What is a reservoir but a basin that holds a valuable element of life, water, that nurtures and nourishes, but where all our skills and abilities are being held behind these walls. What if we just open the floodgates and allow older adults to permeate the culture more actively and share our skills and our experience and knowledge? We would be not a society of scarcity, but a society of abundance. Um, there's a lot of research that shows that intergenerational work teams are the most productive in the workplace. You need young brains and old brains together in order to be the most productive as possible. And what does a company do when it's more productive? It grows. And what does it do when it grows? It hires more people. There's this there's this fallacy called the fallacy of the lump of labor that
yes.
means that says that older people hurry up and retire in the workplace. You're clogging the pipeline for the rest of us young people to advance up. Well, that's a fallacy because it's proven that when you keep older brains in the workplace, remember that quality control I talked about, that,
Yeah.
well, what if we do it this way? Or let's apply this to another department. This protocol works here. What if we try it here? You need both brains doing that. So that's the kind of thing that I don't talk about silver tsunamis. When I hear the phrase, I gently correct somebody and explain why. But we're a reservoir. Let's open up those floodgates.
Really, really like that. It reminds me of a couple of things. First of all, First Nations indigenous cultures, of course, right, with the elderly circles and the elders, and whom are
Right,
passing on wisdom, stories, knowledge, language
right.
to the young. But then social scientists have taught us the notion of your kind of idea of the reservoir and the sort of ideation. You've got fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence,
Mhm,
and
mhm,
fluid typically comes in our younger years. Crystallized, of course, comes in that basin, reservoir of wisdom. And when the
mhm.
two complement one another in an intergenerational workforce situation, you have great fireworks. Like this is what we want. Yet, to your point, I think we've got a lot to learn from because we're trying to package out a bunch of that reservoir of talent and
Mhm.
wisdom and the crystallized intelligence. Okay, sideways skill number 3, looking peripherally as you move forward rather than only straight ahead or in the rear view mirror. I love this idea peripherally. Go ahead, tell me about that one.
Okay, well, like I said before, we tend to see aging, we got these blinders on. If you take the blinders off, you get a wider view of what's going on. So as an example of looking peripherally, and by looking peripherally, I mean, what else is there about this issue that I'm not seeing? So as an example, the phrase over the hill, okay, we older adults are over the hill, right? Well, let's look peripherally as to what it means to climb a hill. What does
Hmm.
it take to climb a hill? You need strength. You need determination. It helps to have some experience if you've climbed other hills before. You may need certain equipment. You might need some mentoring, some skill, some talking to somebody who's climbed that hill before. Okay, so when they say older adults are over the hill, this is how I explain it, and this is the peripheral view because we've gone in depth as to the idea of what does it take to climb a hill. We older adults are not over a hill. We're at the top of a particular hill. And when we're at that particular hill, what we get to see in the distance are other hills yet to climb that we didn't even know existed when we were at the bottom of the hill before we climbed it.
Right.
We were blocked from seeing all these other hills. The climbing doesn't stop for old people. We keep climbing and climbing. We reach a certain point and there's something else that's challenging us. By the way, there's this notion that old people don't like to change. We're stuck in our ways. That's probably one of the silliest things I've ever heard about old people. We don't like to change. We've been changing our entire lives. What was a phone like when I was a kid? I had the dial phone with the cord that you couldn't walk around the room. And, my grandparents had the party line. So you got on the phone
Oh,
and
yeah.
you had a phone like this that you talked into. Um, so that we've adapted to all kinds of phones and cars and washing machines, but also we're adapting to losing people our age, losing our
Hmm.
friends and our spouses and our partners. So we were adapting to that kind of change. Our bodies constantly change, and we have to adapt to those changes. So we're not just the master climbers of the hills, we're the master changers. You want to know about change, you ask an old person. Now, there are people who are reluctant to change. Sure, there are old people reluctant to change, but you know what? There are kids who are reluctant to
Yeah.
change, and
Yeah.
teenagers, and middle-aged people. So when we start stereotyping groups of people, that's when we get into trouble. So look peripherally. When you see something that bothers you, think, is there another way of looking at this? Am I looking at it too narrowly? Let's broaden that view.
Well, and that leads us then to the fourth one, sideways skill number 4. I'm not sure if it's my favorite, but it was my most poignant because it can be applied to many different people, both who are older and looking at their interpretation of what it means to be older. And it goes as follows: being open to the unexpected rather than controlling what you encounter in the moment.
Right. Um, again, well, I'm going to do a little bit of a deviation before I explain that. Let me talk about the fact you talked about fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence,
Hmm.
okay? What we mean by crystallized intelligence is the storage, the stock room of ideas and experiences we have in our heads. So as we get older, your brain changes, you create more. By the way, we can create more brain cells as we age. It used to be that neuroscientists thought you were born with a certain number of brain cells and they just died the older you got. You lost brain cells. We do lose brain cells, but we can also start to create, we also have areas in our brains that can create more brain cells as we
Hmm.
age. But those brain cells then attach to other brain cells and they form these super highways in our brain. Okay. This is the way I like to explain the difference between a younger brain and an older brain. Imagine our brains are like libraries. And you ask a 35-year-old healthy brain to go find a book of War and Peace or Huckleberry Finn, and that brain has a library of 100,000 books. Okay, well, that brain is going to go right to the shelf. Here's the book you want. You ask a 75-year-old brain, healthy, it's got to be a healthy brain. And there are plenty of us 75-year-old people who have healthy brains, okay? We don't all get dementia. In fact, very few of us get dementia as we get older. That's another myth we need to bust.
Hmm.
So you ask that 75-year-old brain, go get me War and Peace or Huckleberry Finn. That library doesn't have 100,000 books. That library has 100 million books. And that library has grown, floors have been built onto it, and the aisles are much longer, and there are many more shelves. So it's going to take us longer to find that book. Oh, is it in the other room? No, I think it's in a box in the basement. Give me a minute. It'll take me a minute to get to it. So that's what I mean about the storage capacity of fluid intelligence. You need older brains who have that institutional memory. If you get rid of older people in the workplace, the ones who've been there for 20, maybe 30 years, you lose that institutional memory. You lose that library of how did we first start to do this process? And is there anything back in this process that's still valuable today, even with all of the technology we've developed? So you lose that. So, so knowing that we have this built-in library, we should be encouraged to know that we have survived so many other things before, that we can then endure and survive whatever is handed to us in the future. By the way, it turns out that older adults have been better mentally at handling COVID than younger people have. The overwhelming number of deaths have been with older adults, but we're handling it more emotionally. And the reason is we have this stock room, this library of experiences of having dealt with other things before. I remember my parents talking about the Depression and about World War II. They survived that. They'll survive the next thing. So we have a greater history of surviving things. So maybe being open to the unexpected is to say, I've got this library and I have this knowledge. I'm confident that I'll be able to survive whatever comes next. So I'm open to exploring, and that's very important for older people. We need to be open to staying engaged, to remain curious, to remain hopeful and optimistic about our lives.
So if we switch the lens on that last point of being open, hopeful, optimistic to the organization, like the workplace, clearly, Jeanette, there's a lot of demographic upheaval where we're living longer, yay,
Right.
but birth rates are plummeting, not so yay.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, we're going to enter into a very demographic situation where the workplace, like we're in the middle of it right now. What am I trying to say is the demography is changing,
Mm-hmm.
and yet we're still kind of on a senior leader level, like buried heads in the sand syndrome of what we should be doing to help the organization from the perspective of a talent pool,
Right.
that maybe we need to be doing something different with said older workers, and whether they're boomers or soon to be Gen X's. We're not having a lot of, yes, millennials, a large cohort, but Gen Zs and alphas, like we're not having a lot of babies. So,
Mm.
what do senior leaders need to be doing in your mind for the older worker to continue working if they so choose? And what does that look like in your mind with what leaders need to be thinking about?
First of all, leaders need to educate themselves on what the older brain can do. They need
Mm.
to understand that this older brain we have is filled with all kinds of. I only described one or two skills that we get. There are other skills that we have. We have the greater ability as we get older to what's called information discrimination. We can tell better and quicker and more easily what piece of information is relevant and what's irrelevant when you do a task.
Mm.
We've created the shortcuts. We'll say, oh, you don't need to do
Uh,
this whole procedure. You can go from here to here. So we have that ability. We have a greater ability for pattern recognition. So we can spot the gist. We can see the forest for the trees. I like to use the metaphor of a maze. You know, if you've ever been through a corn maze. Well, younger brains can be in this corn maze looking around and going, should I go to the left, go to the right? The older brain has that ability to rise above it, see the picture and say, oh, here's where you need to go. So these are the skills that a lot of senior management need to appreciate about the older brain. And I always find it kind of ironic that a lot of senior management are older people. Why don't they see that? They feel they have these skills themselves, but why don't they think that everybody else may have that too? So open themselves up to that. Training of an older brain is different than training of a younger brain because we require other kinds of things because of the capacities and ways our brains have changed. So they need to educate themselves on how, if you're going to do an employee training, that you may need to allow a little bit more time when you're training an older person. You may need to train them in terms of analogies and stories. We process analogies and stories much better because of this pattern recognition, as opposed to younger brains, which is, just give me step A, B, C, and D. Give us older people the why. Why do we need to go from A to B? Because that's how we then will process that information more deeply. So that's what some of the things that, excuse me, what senior management can do. In the hiring process, please, let's get rid of these algorithms that talk about, we need an energetic person. You've listened to me for a few minutes. Do you think I don't have energy? Do you think you
Touche.
don't have energy, Dan?
Touche. Yeah.
So let's get rid of these algorithms. And then in the hiring process, a lot of times older people have had to go through the experience of caregiving like I had. I was out of the workforce for a decade. And at the time, I was a freelancer and I lost all my contacts. I lost all my business because I had to just leave the workplace. And a lot of times that falls to women mostly.
Yeah.
There's that combination of ageism and sexism that happens in the workplace too, where women are never the right age. We're either too young and perky and, you're too young to be in a management position, or we're too old and we become invisible and nobody, wants to hear our ideas around the round table. But if we've had to take time off, whether we're male or female, we've taken time off, when we're being interviewed, don't see that as a deficit. See that, ask that older person what that person learned in the caregiving experience. Because when I was a caregiver, I was also a nurse, I was an accountant, I was a social director, I was I handled insurance policies, all of these skills. So if I'm applying for a job as an older person, and we older people need to not be ageist against ourselves and say, gee, I can't do this at my age, or I don't know enough, or whatever. Talk about what you've learned. If I were being interviewed for a job, I could say, these are the skills I can bring to the workplace that you can really benefit from. And that's the attitude we should have going in, and that's the attitude senior management needs to have when they're hiring us. What's that reservoir you've got? Let's open the floodgates. And how can that irrigate our company and our culture? What do you have? And let's celebrate that. And let's use that.
It seems as though that there is this sort of wisdom exchange, like this reservoir, as you talk about, that is untapped. And that can lead to not just wisdom transfer inside the organization so that middle-aged, younger folks can learn from an older worker with its wisdom and reservoir and crystallized knowledge, obviously, but that there's also the potential economic benefit and spin-off, which is the lens of the older workers' opinion on whether it's a product or a service or a way of doing something, that then also opens up an opportunity for the organization to look at it from a lens that they might not actually be looking at because they're full of 20, 30, 40-year-olds. So how do you see that as an opportunity?
Look at the advertisements that you see and the videos you see and the TV shows you see and the late night monologues you hear about old people, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Very few advertising agencies have older people on their teams.
Right.
So they're gearing ads to people that don't, when they think they want to gear ads for older people, a lot of times they're skewed. They have this crazy notion that we're either totally decrepit and using canes and wheelchairs and everything. And yeah, many of us do use canes and wheelchairs, but so do young people too. Or we're skydiving out of airplanes. Those are the two parameters. There's nothing in between for us. So what we need to do is just involve older people. Nothing for us without us. That should be the motto. If you want to gear anything to an older person, get an older person involved in the discussion, please. You might get the clearer picture as to where you're being stereotyped, where you're being demeaned or misunderstood in some way. And by the way, you're talking about knowledge exchange. There's a lot of knowledge exchanges that older adults want from younger people.
Mm-hmm.
Teach us when I talk to a younger person, teenagers or whatever, I'll say, I was a teenager once, so I sort of know what being a teenager is like, but I was never a teenager now. Tell me what being a teenager is like now. What do you know? And they're, I'm learning about TikTok and learning about all these other things and, AI. AI is a big thing. By the way, we shouldn't be a stereotype to think that older people don't understand technology.
Yeah.
Well, as I said, we've adjusted through all kinds of technology. My generation, the baby boomers, we're the ones that created the computer, by the way. But 80% of us have smartphones. 80 people over 65, 80% of us have smartphones. We go on social media daily, so we're not back in the Stone Age. But there are things we still want to learn, and there are things that we would appreciate learning from younger people. That's the energy of the business world. That's what can happen in the business world. Co-mentoring. You teach me something, I teach you something. Let's all do it together. We're all on the same team.
Well, I've learned a heck of a lot from you through this. Thank you so much. You're not a reservoir of wisdom, but an ocean of wisdom. Jeanette Leardi, author of Aging Sideways, Changing Our Perspectives on Getting Older. Tell us where we can find out more about you and your book.
You can find out more about me on my website. That's JeanetteLeardi.com. I can spell my name JeanetteLeardi.com. You can find my book, and it's in paperback and ebook on Amazon. And you can also just go to my website and you can have a direct link to where you can get the book.
Amazing. Well, as I mentioned, an ocean of wisdom. This has been such a spectacular conversation. Thank you for taking the time. As I say, I've learned a lot. I declare that I am 53 and looking forward to 103. I am at peak Dan, and I'm going to continue to be peak Dan for the next 50 years to go, my friend.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you
Wonderful
so
to
much.
meet you. Wonderful. And thank you again. And for those listening or watching, thank you. You've been watching and listening to another episode of Leadership Now with me, Dan Pontefract, today, author Jeanette Leardi.